Hi, everyone. I'm Erin, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to jump right in. Obviously, take care of your personal needs. Elizabeth.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So you started as a line cook, working in a
Yes.
couple different kitchens, and then you kind of started creating positions for yourself that didn't exist. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you saw those opportunities when you pitched them to your bosses. What did they say? And give us a little context for how that led to the work you're doing now.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Meltz. I was a line cook. I mean, there's a much longer story, which I can tell you not in public sometime, but I was a line cook who wanted to do more than just cook at that point. Not that just cooking isn't great. And I expressed some interest in food safety and sustainability in the job that I was at Del Posto as a line cook. I worked with the chef there to see where the opportunities were, identified a need, and then I did kind of both jobs until the job I wanted became a reality. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. Like, how did it become a reality? They were like,
Yeah.
we don't want you to do two jobs anymore?
Yes, we need someone to do the job you were doing, and we think that there's a need for the job that you have created, and we need two different people to do them.
And then how did it transition to working outside of just Del Posto? Because, I mean, how many restaurants were you working with?
So I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this. Okay. What happened was I started to identify these needs at Del Posto, and then I saw, like, hey, wow, Otto could use a little bit of help with sustainability and food safety. Why don't I go over there? And so, like, why don't I just make the day 17 hours instead of 12? And eventually created the need for that job to be two of them.
Cool. And then now you're working at?
I work at Dig In. Woohoo! Same job, Director of Food Safety and Sustainability.
I just have a quick audience poll. How many people are working more than one job right now? Cool. Elle.
Hi.
Hi. So amongst your many distinguishing characteristics, you're currently the first African-American woman to be on our talent for America's Test Kitchen.
That is
Woohoo!
correct.
Woohoo!
Thanks, guys. Checks in the mail.
So just in case there's someone in the room who doesn't know what a big deal this is, can you give us a sense of what is America's Test Kitchen?
Sure. America's Test Kitchen is one of the, if not the longest running cooking show on public television. It's on PBS and Create. And in 22 years of being on air and 25 years of being in media, they've never had a woman of color fully represented on the cooking show. They have had people of color represented in video, in cooking classes, tutorials, but not on the syndicated television show. And so I was the first person to do that.
Woo.
And so let's say I'm a home cook and I'm like looking to make some really great chocolate chip cookies. There's a couple of recipes out there on the internet.
Right.
Why am I coming to you guys?
Well, so we do what's called a 5-recipe test. We use 5 of the best recipes that we find online in books, which may be some of yours, and this is not to say that yours isn't great. We take all the greatest components from those 5 recipes and create what we call a baseline recipe, and we use that baseline recipe to build, right? So we just test amounts of chocolate, amounts of baking soda or baking powder. And, and in pulling all the best things from each recipe, we make all the mistakes. We find all the proper ways to go about creating a recipe, and then we create what we consider to be a foolproof recipe. That means if you follow the recipe explicitly to the directions, you will make exactly what the recipe calls to make.
It's a high bar.
It is a pretty high bar, but 22 years, I mean, the record's pretty clean.
So you got started working as a food stylist back in 2003. So for context, that's 16 years ago. I feel like I just learned what a food stylist does maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm wondering, in 2003, like, was that a job a lot of your friends were doing and your parents were like, we can't wait till you grow up and be a food stylist, Elle?
Well, oddly enough, when I was 14 in 1990-something, I was watching Dateline with my grandmother, and they were showing food styling. I distinctly remember the person, the stylist, scooping Crisco, using food coloring to color it to make these scoops of ice cream. And in the moment, I was like, yo, that's really interesting, you know? I completely forgot about it. I had no idea I would be doing it. But in 2003, BlogHer boom happened, and I had lots of friends who were blogging, and I was cooking only recreationally because, you know, I was a social worker. They would ask me to just like, can you help me make my food look better? I didn't even know I was a food stylist at that time. It wasn't until I got to Food Network in 2010 that I knew what culinary media even was. I mean, I spent lots of years as a child or a teenager watching Emerald on the Food Network, but there were only about 4 shows at the time. All were men, you know, I didn't know what it was, but when I interned there, they called all of us food stylists, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a thing. But it was there that I had one of my colleagues who was apparently assisting a food stylist, who he wanted to go on vacation, and he was like, hey, I have this food stylist, she needs an assistant because I'm going on vacay, can you do it? And in typical Elle fashion, I said, sure, I'll do it. And then I Googled, like, what is a food stylist? And I didn't get much answers, but I assisted this woman, Liza Journal. She's one of the top food stylists in the city, very talented. I worked with her, which turned into like a 3 or 4 year relationship here in New York. And I learned a lot. I didn't know I was learning, but I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ariel, the true chef on our
Hello.
panel. 18 years in the kitchen under your belt, is that right?
18 years.
So you, you know, from the West Coast, live on the East Coast now, have cooked in a number of different kitchens. In 2009, you decided to take part as a contestant on the TV show Hell's Kitchen, hosted by Gordon Ramsay. And I'm just wondering, like, who was that person in 2009 who was signing up to be, like, yelled at by a crazy white British chef and was like, yeah, that's what I want to do?
So at the time, to be truthful, I really didn't want to go on the show. There was a casting agent going around to different restaurants in Beverly Hills, which is where I was working at the time as a sous chef. And my executive chef was in the kitchen and kind of overhearing this guy kind of walk into our kitchen, which I guess we just allowed people to do. And he came in and kind of saw, he was like, you know, you have a good presence and a friendly look, and I see you interacting, you might be good for television. We're hosting these tryouts. And I was like, oh no, I am very serious about my craft. I am not interested. I'm not in Hollywood for television.
The reason everyone else is in Hollywood.
I know all the servers are like drooling at the pass looking at this person, but I'm like, I'm not going. My chef was like, I'm sending you home unless you go to this thing. So my chef actually forced me to go to this thing. There was thousands of people. Long story short, it was callback after callback after callback, and I was just kind of not taking it very seriously. And then I got down to like 50 people, and I was like, oh shit. I think this might actually happen. And it did. And I have to say that it was, you know, that first time around it was a bit rough. I don't think I was ready for that kind of environment, and I didn't know how to react at the time. You said it was 2000. Was it 2009? I should know my own history.
Well, I mean, that's when it aired. So
that's
probably
when it aired.
filmed
So we
a
actually
little
filmed.
sooner, yeah.
Yeah, we filmed probably in 2008, and you know, at the time, I was not ready for that type of direction of a white British man yelling at me and throwing things.
So I watched my first episode of Hell's Kitchen last night, and I left the episode kind of racked with anxiety. I can't imagine, how did young Ariel deal? I mean, you're on TV, you're having like real emotions, someone's coming at you in this like super aggressive way. Like, how do you even stand up to that?
I think, so I was on twice. So 10 years later,
we'll come to that.
But the first time, it's very interesting that how the first time as a young sous chef who had moved to Southern California, I did not handle it well. I was focused only on myself and my image and how I was being viewed, and so consumed with the idea of failure that I just didn't put myself out there. I never really tried anything I had never tried before, and I was just kind of shell-shocked, and obviously it didn't work out for me. I walked out the door in third place, so.
Third place is
Pretty good.
not
It was
bad.
pretty
I mean,
good.
third place pretty admirable.
But I knew the moment I walked out that door that I had a huge job ahead of me to fill the shoes of the leader that I needed to become.
Yeah, you saw like a clearer picture of future me. Well, I want to stay in the past a little bit longer because I think one of the other things that's challenging as coming up in kitchens as young cooks, the industry definitely has a reputation for partying, hanging out. It's a high stress, high pressure environment. You're in close quarters, and I'm wondering like how for you, Elizabeth, like in your younger years, like how did you kind of handle that environment and like kitchen romance? That's a real thing, like.
Okay, so first of all, now that I've heard everybody else do their little intro, I get a better picture of what I was supposed to do, but I'll try to make up for it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, how many people here have worked in kitchens? Okay, a fair amount. They're sexy. We called it Fire and Knives. It's hot. It's a little bit dangerous. The traditional model is a brigade, a French model, because like, if everyone just goes and does their own thing, it's chaos. So you have one leader, and everybody does what that leader says, even if you think it's wrong. You're not like, oh, chef, maybe we should do it this way. You're like, no, yes we chef, yeah. And there are long hours and late nights and early mornings, and part of the appeal, at least when I was a line cook, was a little bit of the flirtation. Well, I think we'll get to it later. I didn't really party that much, but just the party was sort of in the atmosphere of the restaurant.
And were there, like, when you were working, at that time, were you like, oh, those are the party girls, I'm not a party girl, that's the party guy, this is what happened? Like, what did you think was happening when you didn't go out?
I thought that I was making a decision to keep myself safe by not engaging in any kind of extracurricular. What I realize now, as Erin likes to say, a belated glimpse of the obvious, is that as a woman, I should have been able to do whatever I wanted and still felt safe. But that's hindsight's 20/20.
How about you, Ariel? What would, like, young chef in West Hollywood?
I did not get the responsible memo.
Same. No judgment. No judgment.
But is it responsible? I was responsible, but really, I don't think that's fair. Why does the woman have to?
It's not fair. And I was in LA in my early 20s.
Last year?
Not quite. And then in New York in my, going into my early 30s. So I experienced both cities from that sort of like, go out till moving to New York was like, oh my God, the bars are open till 4.
Woo!
But I'll be honest, I dated a lot of people I worked with, and I did go out, and I was the opposite, where I didn't think about it at all. I think there's a happy medium where you should be able to go out and enjoy and not be concerned about your reputation and what you're doing for your career, whereas I wasn't thinking about that, and I probably did things that were detrimental, where I wish I could go back and tell myself, eventually when you become a leader, the people are watching you all the time. Once a leader, always a leader.
If a man had done those things, would you think they've been detrimental?
They wouldn't have been at the time when when I was coming up, in LA at that time. It was perfectly normal for my executive chef to go home with one of the line cooks. And if I had gone home with the executive chef, it would have been
Scandal.
a complete scandal, and I would have never been promoted to sous chef had I done that.
I feel like the kitchen I worked at, we had code for like hot girls in the dining room. So side of rice was for a hot Asian girl. If you were like a super, super hot girl, you were called a rubber because you were something to dump in. And I worked in like really nice women, positive, friendly kitchens. And like at the time, I wasn't like, how dare you say that? I was like, yeah, let me go look.
You giggled along because
Yeah.
it felt
What
like that
table?
was what you were supposed to do.
Yeah, because like I guess like I guess just to give a little color to this environment. I mean, we like to maybe Elizabeth, you want to share the vegetable story?
So we haven't really talked about it, but Erin and I started an organization on the side called Women in Hospitality United because we think that this is an issue and one of the things that we oh look, and they put up the thing on the screen. One of the things that we decided or that we realized was that these forms of sort of harassment and double standard, whatever, they exist, and like Erin said, it's like, let me get a look. What does this girl look like? It was the penis-shaped vegetable, right? The parsnip, like, every time you walked by, and the prep cook was like, do you want this one? And you're like, and at the time you're like, no, thanks, that's I'm good. But looking back, and Erin and I have discussed like how much time we could have saved, how much energy we could have saved if we didn't have to deal with that. If I didn't have to spend all that emotional energy, like, okay, that's just him. It's going to be part of my day. And yes, the penis-shaped parsnip is.
I spent a lot of time chopping. I weld my knife. That is my reputation. But, just in thinking and, a lot of us who work in the food industry, that's like 90% of our community, So we spend almost all of our time there. And it's difficult to say, like, I'm not going to date someone that I work with because you're always with the people that you work with, And I don't think that dating or marrying someone in the industry is the part that is harmful. It is harmful when those relationships are extremely casual and they start to, bleed into inappropriateness in the workplace. That's really, I think that's ultimately, the focus with that. And, being in the kitchen is hard work. We work very, very hard. Before I got into the cushy life of culinary media, I had to do my fair share of line cooking and prep cooking, and you work hard, and the decompression process is even harder. You drink more, you smoke more, you just do more than the average person. Like we would trade cigarettes, like it was, I don't know.
You were in prison.
Yeah, right? Like, and if your trade person didn't have a pack, you were like, go home, and you don't even have to be a smoker. It's just part of, the environment. It kind of becomes who you are. And I think that a lot of the work that's happening in the industry, especially with WeWho and, and lots of other women-centered organizations, is finding the appropriateness in the industry, like creating it. If you can't find it, feeling empowered to create that standard in your workplace.
Well, I think power is the right word here, right? Because I think where things get problematic is when there is this power imbalance. And, Elizabeth, you worked for Mario Batali for just over a decade.
You can boo if you want to. You just boo.
But real talk, yes. Mario was a mentor. He was a friend. He was a person who stewarded your career. And I guess, can you talk a little bit about how there was a kind of reckoning that happened in the fall of 2017. How did that news make its way to you? And what was happening for you that fall when all of this information was coming to light?
Yes. We've set the stage very well to paint a picture of what kitchen environment was like, and I think what we thought was acceptable or what we accepted. So to say that there were some shocking things to me personally, but as far as like inappropriate behavior or drugs and alcohol, that was not a shock to anybody in our industry. I think what happened when you realize that you've been sort of living in this world where things were sort of acceptable, not even sort of, things were acceptable, when it lands as a reality that real wrong has been done, not just like, oh, gray area or maybe a little inappropriate, you take a step back, and as you said, I worked for him for 11 years. So this is a person who even now I sit here and think, I hope me talking about him doesn't hurt his feelings. And then I think, what about the women he assaulted? Maybe their feelings are fucking hurt, right? So, how do we make space for that gray? And Erin and I were talking, and I'm not bashing Trump, although I'd love to, but we all have relatives. No, but we all have relatives that have political differences from us. We go home for Thanksgiving, and we don't. Granted, I understand, although in some cases, but that sexual assault, and your political differences are vastly different. But we all have people in our lives who are both good and bad, or who have done bad things, or who do bad things. And sort of, where is the space for how we deal with that? And I know I'm not alone. What he did was wrong. That is very black and white. What I do with the fact that this person was also very good to me for a part of my life is not. And I'm not asking for your sympathy. I do believe that there has to, it's the same way we deal with the prison system, and we have to figure out a way to make space for that gray.
Yeah. I can completely relate to that. I spent a lot of years after interning at Food Network, working there, freelancing, and have very great relationships with Paula Deen. So it was very heartbreaking to know, the way that she used her language to express ethnicities, and it was heartbreaking. I really couldn't wrap my head around that, and I didn't know how to make space for that, but it definitely reminded me of what it feels like to be alienated in the kitchen, to be one of 2 women of color, one of 5 women out of 30, out of 30 people, I didn't, and I think that's, part of how we all kind of came into the same space.
So, Elle, you gave a talk recently called Misogyny Loves Company.
Yeah.
And kind of building a little bit on this gray space, and the work that you do through She Chefs. Maybe can you talk a little bit about why we need to spend more time in this area?
Absolutely. My perspective changes all the time. Every time I have a conversation about equity or diversity, in the kitchen space or in the food and beverage industry, my perspective changes. I think for me right now, my focus is making sure that we start to treat the conversations about biases, inequality, and equity as everyday conversation. That's kind of where I am with it now. It's non-negotiable. You live in America. People don't look like you all the time. It's high time we just start to figure out best ways to coexist and practice across the board. We already know that it is profitable to have a diverse workspace. It's statistically proven. Let's just do the work, have the conversations. I have biases. Raise your hand if you have biases. Every hand should go up in this room. Everyone has a bias. If it's not about women, if it's not about food, if it's not about jobs and who should work them, there's no one walking that doesn't have a bias. And the sooner we can just accept that and start to pinpoint our biases and work at them personally and collectively, we'll just have naturally more equitable spaces. It'll just happen.
So talking, I think, Ariel, about that personal work, and you said before that you had a very clear vision of the leader you wanted to become. So roughly a decade later, you came back on the show, and you won. And so I'm like, who was that person? What happened in those intervening 10 years? Who was the Ariel that showed up in season 2018?
Well, that would be way too long to go through those 10 years. But one of the things that I struggled with, over the last 10 years was how to react to the men in the business. I was generally the only woman in the kitchen. And I think that for a long time, a lot of us women would overcompensate and be extremely aggressive because at the time we felt that was the only way to measure up and say, hey, I'm here. And, you know, it's been a long time coming for me to reconcile that I didn't need to have a loud voice or an aggressive voice to have a voice. And, you know, dealing with the idea of if I'm going to be respected as a leader and as a contender and as a equal chef, you know, I have to work at this from another angle and another direction. And I started just owning my craft and owning my knowledge and just becoming more of a, you know, lead by example person and helping the men around me, not confronting them or combating them, but becoming a mentor for even someone above me, whether you were above me in a position as the sous chef or the line cook next to me or the dishwasher, whatever I had to offer that I was an expert at, I would offer it kindly and graciously and would always check myself. And at first it was very, very hard because I had gained this really aggressive kind of like voice. It took years to calm that voice, and you can see it if anyone watches when I came back. Anyone who talks to me who watched the season said, "You look so calm."
It was amazing the entire time.
Every episode, every minute, Gordon Ramsay could be screaming in your face, and you're calm all the time. And that was not easy. That was 10 years of work of learning that I don't need to react that way, and that's not how I communicate. And in fact, it's only detrimental when I do because it's received as an emotional response. And how many women in here have been told that you're being emotional anytime that you have anything to say in a passionate manner? And then, of course, we all have our favorite line is when someone tells you to relax or calm down. The only time you will see Ariel go from 0 to 100 will be when you tell me to relax or calm down.
I think we're about to see that with Daenerys on Game of Thrones. They're all like, it's okay.
But just to wrap it up, going into the second time around, I was very focused, very calm, and I take everything. It took a long time to get there, and I walked in, and I knew I was going to win. That was what I set out to do. So.
And you did it. Well, I mean, I think that's the thing, right? You got to see it to be it. So if the only leadership models that you've seen in an industry are loud, angry white guys, then it's, you know, doesn't take a huge jump to be like, oh, I guess that's the way you act as a leader. Right. And I think one of the things that's been really exciting about the Me Too movement is it kind of sets this reset where we all have a collective lean back and we're like, wait a minute, we can have a different vision for the future. And I think that's what's exciting to hear now is all these people out here writing new stories. So, Elizabeth, I would love to hear a little bit about the work that WeWho's doing, which is like a weird question for me to ask, but it's really for you guys. And thinking about this like vision for the future, the way things could be.
I just want to give a shout out to your Medium piece. If anybody's in, Erin wrote, I know she's the moderator, so we're not, but she wrote a Medium piece about what it's like to be a female line cook, and it really talks about how you start to wear these. I mean, go ahead, actually. Why don't you?
Oh, just the kind of role switching
Yes.
where I'm like, I can be your sexy baby, I can be your stern mommy, I can be one of the guys,
yeah.
But what I can't be is just like someone who's working really hard to do my really hard job.
Yes.
Preach, that was good.
It's a good piece. Anyway, Women in Hospitality United was born of the Me Too movement, specifically in hospitality. I, as I've already sort of vulnerably expressed, had a lot of emotions after the news sort of struck me, and I thought, I can't be the only one. Was I part of the problem? Am I part of the solution? How did we get here? How can we get out of it? And I literally sent an email to every woman I knew in hospitality and said, what does Time's Up look like for women in hospitality? And we got together about 45 women in New York City. We actually even had a dial-in, which was a disaster because nobody could hear anything. And actually, the first meeting was kind of a general disaster. It was, I mean, women, as Erin likes to say, are not a monolith, right? Not every woman felt the same way about how we got here. Yeah. There was a woman who stood on the outskirts the whole time and was like, I've partied with Mario Batali 100 times and nothing's ever happened to me. And that was sort of her, you know. So, we committed to doing 5 meetings, and the subsequent meetings were much more organized. Really picked up on some themes from the first meetings and went through. And Elle as an advisory board member, and since then we've had an event, the Solution Sprint, which was hugely successful, and we're committed to fixing this.
So we have a room full of producers, content makers, you know, people who play that role often, get put under this category of like the media. And you're like, oh, the media, if the media was XYZ. So I guess I want to just, in closing, open it up to everyone briefly. Like, what do we want from this group? What are the stories we want to be telling and we want to be reading? And Elle, maybe I'll start with you.
I think I would like for broader stories to be told. There's so much more to each and every person than what we see on the surface. Maybe even just like what they offer at their jobs. Like, everyone has an inside story, and I think if you are given the responsibility of being in media, it is also your responsibility to dig just a bit deeper and to find out, the inside stories of people. We are more than what we look like. We're more than where we work. We're more than who we're married to, or even our affiliations. Like who are people? Who are they really?
I'm going to go Elizabeth and then Ariel.
I think
let you take it home.
I'm going to pass in the interest of time because I think they're going to. I had my
I'd
voice
like
hurt.
to see them try and cook us off. We're like, we have knives.
I just would like to add, I was actually talking backstage about this. There may be not as many women in the CEO position or controlling companies from a business standpoint and running the business yet, and we're getting there. But we are taking over control of the content of the world, and you can see that by everyone in this room.
Yes.
So I would like us all to focus on the power that we do have as the people controlling the content, and consider the responsibility that we have to do the storytelling, because, okay, we might not be the CEOs of every company yet, but we certainly, exactly, but we certainly have control of what everybody is hearing, seeing, watching, believing. So it comes with a responsibility.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.